What is up, everyone? This is Jacob Moses, host of the Not Boring Tech Writer, where in each episode we teach technical writers a different skill so they can enhance their skill sets, improve their marketability, diversify their career, and pretty much just prove to all the haters that technical writing is not a boring career. This episode's skill: understanding user experience design. Think about the technical writer's relationship with software documentation. Technical writers excel at describing the functions, possible use cases, and benefits of a feature within a single document. But how do we know how the user navigated to that document? What experiences has he or she had with the software or particular feature before that could dictate how we craft that single document? That's where user experience design comes in. Applying usability, accessibility, and user testing practices to enhance the experience of the user. To help me unpack this topic, my guest today is Autumn Hood, User Experience Designer at Sabre. Together, we'll teach you how to think like a user experience designer so you can create an enjoyable documentation experience for your users. Enjoy. Hi, Autumn. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jacob. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. And thank you for taking some time to chat with me today. I'm excited.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So we've had some conversations preceding this interview, kind of with the theme that the role of the traditional tech writer, being a good writer and editor, really isn't enough. And as more organizations are re-engineering, we're actually seeing a lot of those traditional tech writing roles being outsourced. And that's because the technical writer is now being called to do more symbolic analytic work, really rethinking how to create, store, retrieve, and display content for multiple different purposes. And I really think a huge part of that is understanding user experience design, which is what you're a professional in. So just to get us started, would you mind defining user experience design for us and give us a few real-life examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So, user experience goes beyond the screen, although that's definitely where it's most applied in terms of, how we think of it. But it's basically this concept that so when someone's interacting with something, they have an experience with it, and that embodies, maybe the interface that they're interacting with, their physical context, their previous experience with that entity or that brand, maybe their trust of that brand, maybe more specifically like a user flow. So when we're talking about user experience, it doesn't just have to be the screen. I mean, you can think about it with another analogy. For example, a car. You can drive like a 1983 Beater, right? And it'll get you from A to B, but the experience of perhaps driving, like a 2016 Tesla is going to be totally different, even though they perform basically the same function and they allow you to complete your tasks the same way. So that's kind of the difference, in terms of, how can experiences be different from virtually the same product? And so user experience design is basically the discipline of enhancing those experiences using principles like usability, accessibility, color, design theory, for, interfaces that people actually see and interact with, using user-centered design practices, using user research or user testing results if you're able to get them. And so you use all these things, you use all these tools to try to produce effects that are desirable and predictable, and software, basically, in my case, that people are going to understand and like using.
I love it. And then So thinking about the end user, and that really is the focal point in user experience design, obviously.
Sure.
Say they're wanting to learn more about the software. Where does user experience design come in to ensure that the end user is able to find content throughout this site? How does user experience help them navigate?
Well, that is a really good question. And I think that kind of goes back to your opening statement, which is that it's not enough to be able to write and design anymore. And that's because our expectations of what our role is in understanding software or anything that's documented has changed so drastically. Before, let's say 30 to 40 years ago, when we're starting to see more of personal, software and hardware that's kind of coming into our homes more at a individual level. We're given these manuals, and we're kind of expected. That's kind of like the least common denominator that an enterprise has to give you to understand, so you can understand something. It's like, well, we have to give them something. So, and so people kind of got used to reading these documents because that's all they knew, and they thought that was good enough. But then, of course, trends have changed, and I think user experience design plays a huge role along with technical communication and technical documentation, because so much of the content that people access is now online. And not only that, but these metaphors for how we access this content are changing now to shift more towards like a community-based way of accessing things. So you're thinking the technical forums, Stack Exchange. I mean, like, if you're a user and you're just trying to figure out a simple problem, you're more likely to probably search Google or search Stack Exchange or search, that applications or that brand site, just really quickly. And so so you're interacting with that content, but in a digital format a lot of the time. And so, digital interfaces aren't necessarily, we've learned how to use them, but it's not quite the same as flipping through a document. You have to understand the site's information architecture. You have to understand the site's clickability cues. You have to understand the site's navigation. All those things are going to affect the way you're able to access the content that you're looking for. So really, it's like user experience, that has to be set up in a way for the users to succeed to find what they're looking for. Even down to things that you can't see, like search results and the way things are tagged and the metadata that is associated with them. That's also a part of the user experience. It's just not, you can't see it.
Yeah. And you raise a great point about how whenever individuals were getting this hardware, that it was okay, like here's a manual, like this is what's expected. We're going to give it to you. And our last guest, we talked about just-in-time documentation, and that was really as the end user asks a question, you provide an answer. How it's still good to have those manuals, but those are more just in case, because the end user, and I think this ties in well with user experience design, they're not necessarily thinking in terms of feature. They're thinking in terms of the action they'd like to take.
Right,
and
they're more
task-oriented. That's a perspective that the UX designer has. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. They're a little bit more task-oriented in their queries than kind of system-oriented. Like, what is it about this thing that I'm trying to figure out? It's more it's more self-reflective. It's like, what am I trying to do, regardless of how the thing does it. And so I think that plays a huge role in how TechCom really, you can't have, I think, good TechCom without good UX design, and vice versa.
Yeah. So let's talk about knowledge bases, where the end user goes to find information on the task that to accomplish. Let's start kind of broad and talk about, what do you think a knowledge base with good UX design looks like, and then what a knowledge base with poor UX design would look like? What are some elements?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think like we kind of already touched on a huge one for me, which is system-centered design, or system-centered content versus user or task-centered content. So it's like describing in great detail what this system might do in the system's own terms, versus like what users are actually trying to do with that system, and whether or not that function is something people even are looking for or know is there, and whether or not it's in terminology people are expecting and understand. So I think that's a huge gap between good knowledge center and a bad knowledge center. And I think another one has to do with information architecture. So kind of the way the content is laid out, are things where people expect to find them? Are the associations that the writers or UX designers have made, are those associations the same as their users? So I think that those are two huge categories of where sometimes the content or the design can fail the users, and so they can't be successful. And
in your experience, how has the UX designer worked with the technical communicator, or vice versa? Have you noticed they've often been siloed, or have they had good conversation throughout? What has your experience been?
Sure. So, I mean, there definitely is somewhat of a silo when you're working remote, which is the case for a lot of big companies because it's just impossible to have, you know, people working all together, which would be ideal. But, a lot of the times what UX designers can do to kind of help their writers, because they're the people that are making sure, and it's not just end users that tech writers write for, right? Because they're often writing for the engineers themselves. Like this is for the engineers to be able to continue to work on this product, for example.
Or customer support. I was at a tech writing meetup, or Write the Docs meetup a couple of weeks ago, and a young man said that support makes the end user's life easier, and documentation makes support's life easier.
Right.
And
yeah.
it could be. That's huge.
That is such a huge concept. Admins, configurators. So yeah, there's a lot of people that are using this documentation, but end users are for sure one of our main focal points. But I think that in being good technical communicators themselves, that's the way UX designers are going to really create this path of communication, reciprocity with the writers that are documenting what they're designing. So understanding principles of style, understanding principles of voice and tone, and clarity. I think that it's essential for designers to be able to know those concepts so that they're able to explain what it is that they're trying to put out there.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about design and those basic design elements. How can a technical communicator think about design as they're writing the documents? I know we mentioned voice and we mentioned tone, which are huge, but there's a bigger picture in just thinking about how that content is being designed among the rest of the content. What are some action items tech writers can take to improve their design mindset?
Oh, that is so huge. So, even if we just forget the digital interface for now and we just go back to paper manuals, tech writers have a lot of design aspects to their content. For example, obviously things like headings, things like primary, secondary, and tertiary headings, things like emphasis, things like terminology. So in there, a lot of the times you're using things like color theory. You're wanting to use colors that contrast but don't conflict. You're wanting colors that don't provide any kind of existing associations that they're not meant to provide. You're wanting to ensure that there's proximity between headers and body content and so on and so forth. You're wanting to make sure that you're consistently using the same cues to users, like whether or not this is a definition term or whether or not this is a technical term. So you're constantly employing design elements such as color and typeface and alignment. And that's just for print technical communication, and then you move on to the web, and then you have to think about, well, how are people searching for this content? What are the words they're going to use most likely? What kinds of metadata do I have to then make sure gets implemented into this content? So really, it's like a lot of these things, apply whether or not you're writing for the web or you're writing for print.
So Autumn, we started the conversation just talking about how the traditional tech writer's role of being a good writer and editor aren't necessarily enough to bring an organization value. Let's think about the traditional tech writer versus the tech writer who's able to kind of get more of the big picture and apply that UX mindset to their documentation. What makes he or she more valuable than the traditional tech writer?
One of my favorite answers for this kind of question comes from an article I read a few years ago in school, Ginny Reddish, Understanding Readers. Basically, and a lot of what you learn in tech comm courses, it comes down to usability and user experience. It's just we kind of frame it around the language that's used and the words and the content. But so much of it really is just whether or not a document is usable. So anyway, this article basically, I don't remember the specifics, but they cleaned up this document. They did some user testing on it. They improved it. The document had previously been system-centered, and they made it user-centered, and calls dropped by like 50% or some crazy number. Wow. People were like, the revenue had increased because people were coming back more and more as return customers. So having a product that is usable and then, on top of that, the documentation that's usable, it really saves it saves real dollars because companies are then having to spend less and less on rework, whether that's dev or whether that's the content itself, like the technical, communication itself, or whether that's the amount of support you have to provide through a call center. So, getting it right the first time, it takes longer up front, but in the end, it pays out, a million times over.
That's a technical communicator's often biggest struggle is, okay, like I know I'm doing good work, I know it's necessary, but I can't really prove its effect on the bottom line.
Yeah.
So we'll include that article in the show notes if listeners are interested in what Miss Autumn is talking about. Sounds like a lovely article.
Oh, it's a great article that I still come back to this day. I don't remember the specifics, but it's really, really great. And Ginny Reddish is just fantastic. But there's another article, kind of to your point about, well, people are struggling to prove this value maybe up front. Maybe they're needing more resources. Like I have too much on my plate and I don't have time to test this document or, do user research to make sure I'm writing it for the right people or the right way. And then Susan Weinschenk, I think is how you pronounce her name. I might have to correct myself later. But she has a great webinar on the ROI of user research, but it applies to what you're talking about. Basically, she provides people in our positions with the tools necessary to make these kinds of persuasive arguments to, people like management or executives or other stakeholders to say, yes, it's going to cost us, this much up front to hire more people or to stop work and do this kind of testing. But in the end, it saves, this much time and this much money. Yeah. So having those kinds of persuasive skills and understanding, and that alone is a technical communication concept, right? I mean, talking to your audience in terms that motivate them and that they understand. So management, obviously, they're about bottom line. They're about resources. So coming to the table with content for them is going to, increase your success.
That's big, Autumn.
Yep. Well, thank you.
So let's finish off by I think we've done an awesome job of really unpacking what user experience design means on its own, and then also its relationship with technical communication. And if someone's listening and they feel confident as a writer or editor, but really want to increase their value as an employee to his or her organization, what are some action items that they can apply today to really work on really honing in on that user experience design perspective on their work?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it kind of depends on what their role is and exactly what they're writing. But, for example, if someone is writing technical documentation that they know is going to be on the web, I would find out, okay, well, what is our site like? Where are they finding this kind of this content? What are they searching to find it? You can find those kinds of analytics. And so that might inform the language that you use in your document. You might say, well, I've been typing in the word product all this time, but really they're calling it device when they search 90% of the time. So maybe that's what I need to be calling it. So you can find out all kinds of analytics. You can find out all kinds of user research with, you can partner with people that are already doing this work, most likely in your company, and really get more information from them. To really enhance the content that you're writing to make sure that it's really streamlined and it's really consistent. You mentioned those silos, and I think that just trying to reach out, is one way to help break them down and just kind of, if you're designers or your researchers or your developers, if they're not really that aware of your role, I would make them aware of your role and let them know what you're doing. And, I think that they would be happy to tell you, like, okay, well, this is something that we're working on and maybe something your users are struggling with, and that can help inform what you write about.
Yep. And then that ties in back to value too. Because we often do work in silos, getting in there and talking with the different teams and being aware of what's going on. It's an expansive ecosystem, but it's good to always be in the loop, and that definitely helps with a technical communicator's value. And
I would like to, just if there's time, kind of mention, great, just, if we can kind of mention, if anyone is looking into getting into the UX design field or UX research field, I would just like to say that it's easier than I don't want to make it sound like it's not work, but it's more feasible, it's more possible maybe than it might seem. I know at first it's kind of daunting to think about, well, there's this whole other subject matter. I don't know if I really have time to get into that. Just some tips that I have for anyone that is interested. I'm assuming people maybe are, but maybe they're not. But I think that, anyone that's going through like a tech com program is really learning the foundation that they need to move to like maybe branch out into these other areas of like UX. So like, cause you're learning about audience analysis, you're learning about clarity, you're learning about like making sure that the message you send out there is the one that people are receiving. You're learning all kinds of tools already, and then it's just kind of a different way to apply them when you talk about UX design, and it's maybe a different set of tools and software that you use to produce that stuff. But it's really, really quite close. And another thing I will say is that you often kind of, at least for me, and actually there's another girl that I work with that actually went through the same program that Jacob and I went through, and we both are on the UX team, but we have these tech com backgrounds, and you kind of find yourself doing like these tech com like roles. Like, for example, we needed a really short like 2-pager on how to set up Camtasia for the specific type of video that our work was doing, and who else would do it but me? like you kind of find yourself volunteering or maybe being asked to help out in these areas, because this technical communication is so valuable. And I think it's kind of funny that we say things like it's not enough to write and edit anymore. I do believe that that's true, but it's also a little bit confusing to me, because it still is something that I feel like is missing for some. It's not something that people can do easily without training or education or whatever. So
yeah, I agree. I think the testament to that is more so it's just understanding methodologies, and that's where you come in. It's okay, like how do we actually display this content? How do we conduct usability assessments to make sure it's even useful? So of course, the being able to write and edit is an essential skill. But I think for the essential value really comes from being able to supplement it with thinking about the user and user experience design.
Yeah, which is everything that you're already doing. It's just as like a technical writer in the more traditional sense, it's just to think about the UX design part of it or the user experience part of it, even it's just thinking about, well, where are your users going to be when they access this? Mm-hmm. and that's a concept that's not foreign to tech com.
And I appreciate you bringing up how the skills that technical writers already possess do tie in well with user experience design. I mean, a huge part of this podcast isn't only just helping tech writers acquire more skills so they can stay in their current occupation, but it's also to encourage them to potentially diversify their career and to pursue new positions and new job titles, that they're not restricted to just being called the tech writer and searching tech writer in Indeed.com or whatever they're using. That those skills do translate, and I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Autumn, that was awesome, and thank you so much for just sharing your expertise with us. And I mean, the technical communicator is always trying to find a way to exhibit their value, and I really appreciate you sharing some of those anecdotes along the way as well.
Thank you for having me on. It's been fun.
Of course. And just to finish up, if anyone that's listening wants to connect with you or follow what you're doing, where can they find you on the internet?
Oh gosh. My stuff is so neglected online, but I have a Twitter. I tweet about UX design, like not very often, but that's mostly what I tweet about. I'm on Twitter if anyone just wants to like have a new contact on there. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm also very, not very active on there. I have an online profile somewhere that has some of my work.
There we go.
I think it's just autumnleehood.com. Although, again, it's actually, I think it might even say that I work at my last job still. So I should probably update that before this goes out.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm definitely online, easy to search. So if anyone wants to just ask me more about, UX design at all, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, Autumn, thank you so much again. It was so nice talking to you. And
Yeah, it was great.
enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, bye, Jacob.
Bye, Autumn.